We tried to get a hold of you this afternoon to just chat a little bit about the show, and they said, well, Tom's hours are.
For decades, Tom Jones seemed untouchable, a voice that filled arenas, a presence that ruled Las Vegas, and a career that outlasted generations. But behind the scenes, Tom was fighting battles the world didn't always see. The death of his wife ended the life he had known for nearly 60 years. The choices he made during his rise left him with regrets he now admits openly. And today, his career looks nothing like the one that made him famous. There are fewer shows, long silences, and sudden cancellations. What really pulled Tom Jones out of constant view? Fans assumed age or irrelevance, but the truth is more complicated. The rise of Tom Jones. During his peak years, Tom Jones was more than a singer. He was a symbol of Las Vegas glamour, excess, and old-school showmanship. His voice filled radios, television screens, and concert halls across the world. But years later, the spotlight that once followed him everywhere began to fade. The headlines slowed, the appearances became fewer, and behind the scenes, a series of personal blows and professional challenges quietly reshaped his career in ways most fans never saw coming. Tom Jones was born Thomas John Woodward on June 7, 1940, in Treforest, a small working-class town near Pontypridd in South Wales. His father worked as a coal miner, and his mother stayed home to care for the family. This was not a household built on artistic ambition or industry connections. It was shaped by long hours, modest pay, and practical expectations. Music was not viewed as a career path. It was simply something people enjoyed when work was done. But that changed abruptly when Jones was 12 years old. He contracted tuberculosis, an illness that forced him out of school and into long-term isolation. For nearly 2 years, he spent most of his time confined to bed, while other children moved on with their lives. There were no classrooms, no sports, and no normal routines. What he did have was time and a voice that grew stronger the more he used it. He sang constantly to pass the hours, imitating records he heard, and testing how far his voice could go. When his health improved, Jones returned to a world with limited options. He left school at 15, as many working-class boys did at the time, and took whatever jobs were available. He worked in construction. He worked in a glove factory. None of it paid well, and none of it offered a future. Music, however, followed him wherever he went. He sang in pubs, clubs, and small local venues, slowly building a reputation for having a voice that stood out in any room. By the early 1960s, he became the frontman for a local Welsh beat group called Tommy Scott and the Senators. The band worked constantly, performing night after night across South Wales. These were not glamorous gigs, but they were consistent, and they taught Jones how to command an audience. He learned how to project, how to move, and how to hold attention, even in noisy rooms where people were not there to listen. Those lessons would later define his stage presence. Tom's life changed in 1965 with the release of It's Not Unusual. The song became a #1 hit in the UK almost immediately. It also broke through internationally, introducing Jones to American audiences who were hungry for bold personalities and powerful voices. Unlike many British singers of the era, Jones did not rely on subtlety. His sound was direct, muscular, and rooted in rhythm and blues. The success of that single did not just launch his career, it repositioned him as a global entertainer. Television played a major role in cementing that image. Appearances on The Ed Sullivan Show brought him into millions of American homes, where his energy translated effortlessly to the screen. Soon after, he was given his own variety program, This is Tom Jones, which aired from 1969 to 1971 and was broadcast internationally. The show featured major guests and placed Jones at the center of a fast-moving, high-profile entertainment machine. By this point, his transformation was complete. The former coal miner's son from Wales had become a recognizable face of mainstream pop culture. His image evolved alongside his success. Jones became known not just for his voice, but for his physical presence and confident masculinity. His performances were energetic, theatrical, and unapologetically bold. That persona turned him into a Las Vegas staple, where his style fit perfectly with the city's appetite for spectacle. For years, his name was synonymous with packed showrooms and long-running residencies. Soon enough, the recognition began pouring in. He won the Grammy Award for Best New Artist in 1966. Decades later, received the Brit Award for Best British Male in 2000. And in 2006, was knighted by Queen Elizabeth II for his services to music. Over the course of his career, he sold more than 100 million records worldwide, maintaining relevance across multiple musical eras, a rare achievement by any standard. Yet even at the height of that success, cracks were forming beneath the surface. The same image that made him famous would later limit how he was perceived. The industry began to define him too narrowly, and the public slowly stopped seeing past the persona. And that shift would mark the beginning of a far more complicated chapter in Tom Jones's story: the career struggle and reinvention. By the mid-1960s, Tom's voice, appearance, and physical confidence made him instantly recognizable. Record labels, promoters, and television producers quickly leaned into that appeal. He was presented as bold, masculine, and openly desirable. His performances were intense, physical, and unapologetically direct. Audiences responded immediately, especially female fans, and the industry took note. From that point on, his image was carefully framed around one idea: Tom Jones as the ultimate ladies' man. That image worked until it didn't. As his popularity grew, so did the emphasis on spectacle. His stage shows became larger and more theatrical. The energy was undeniable, but the focus increasingly shifted away from the technical skill behind his singing. His range, control, and ability to move between genres were rarely discussed. Instead, attention stayed fixed on his persona. This wasn't an accident. It was a marketing decision, repeated so often that it became difficult to separate the singer from the character built around him. Las Vegas played a major role in locking that perception in place. In 1967, Jones began performing extended residencies there, and the city embraced him fully. He fit perfectly into Vegas culture at the time. The shows were lucrative and consistent, offering stability few artists could match. But they also came with an unspoken cost. Vegas' success often carried a stigma, especially as popular music evolved. Artists associated too closely with the Strip were increasingly seen as entertainers of a specific era, not evolving musicians. As Jones continued performing in Vegas year after year, that label stuck. To many critics and younger listeners, he became a fixture of lounge stages rather than recording studios. While he was still releasing music, it rarely received serious attention. The assumption was simple and damaging: he was a performer first and an artist second. That assumption ignored the depth of his vocal ability, and once it took hold, it proved difficult to reverse. By the late 1970s, the music landscape had shifted dramatically. Disco dominated dance floors. Punk stripped music down to raw defiance. New wave introduced electronic textures and detached irony. Against that backdrop, Jones's traditional pop and soul sound struggled to compete for chart space. Radio stations moved on. Television exposure slowed. His chart performance declined sharply, not because his voice had weakened, but because the industry no longer knew where to place him. Throughout the 80s, he continued to perform consistently, especially in Las Vegas. But he was no longer seen as current. He became associated with nostalgia, even though he was still actively working. This affected the opportunities he was offered and the seriousness with which his work was reviewed. Attempts to release new material often passed with little notice, reinforcing the idea that his best years were behind him. Breaking free from that cycle proved frustrating, but the shift finally began slowly in the 90s, when Jones made a deliberate decision to approach his career differently. Rather than fighting younger artists for relevance, he worked with them. Collaborations introduced his voice into new contexts without forcing it to change. This approach reached its peak in 1999 with the release of Reload, an album built entirely around duets. Featuring artists like Robbie Williams and the Cardigans, The project placed Jones alongside contemporary performers while allowing his voice to remain unmistakably his own. The result was unexpected and effective. Reload sold millions of copies and reintroduced Jones to audiences who had never considered him relevant. Importantly, it reframed him as a veteran artist capable of adapting without imitation. For the first time in years, critics began paying attention again. That renewed interest carried into the 2000s, when Jones leaned even further into material that reflected his musical roots. Albums such as Praise and Blame and Spirit in the Room moved away from pop spectacle and focused on gospel, blues, and traditional American music. Critics who had once dismissed him began reassessing his career, acknowledging a vocal power and emotional restraint that had long been overshadowed by his image. Television also played a role in reshaping how audiences saw him. While serving as a coach on The Voice UK, viewers saw his musical knowledge, patience, and respect for vocal craft. For younger audiences especially, this was their first real introduction to him. Yet even as his professional reputation recovered, his personal life was quietly unraveling. Behind his comeback and career recalibration was a turbulent love life and a loss that would change Tom Jones in ways the spotlight could never capture. The tragic loss of his wife. For most of his career, Tom Jones was defined by what the public could see: the voice, the confidence, and the relentless schedule of performances. But what remained largely invisible was the person who stood behind that life, untouched by fame and intentionally removed from it. While audiences focused on the image of Tom Jones the entertainer, his private world revolved around one constant presence that never sought attention and never asked for recognition. That person was his wife, Melinda Rose Trenchard, known to everyone as Linda. She was born and raised in Wales and lived an ordinary life by choice, even after marrying one of the most recognizable entertainers of his generation. She lived almost entirely outside the public narrative of his success, choosing a quiet, domestic life. But her absence from the spotlight was not a mystery or a contradiction. It was a deliberate choice that shaped their marriage and anchored Tom's life long before success complicated everything. Tom and Linda met in Pontypridd when they were both just 12 years old. They attended the same school, grew up in the same community, and shared the same modest surroundings. As teenagers, they became inseparable. Their relationship continued through Tom's early working years when he had little money and no clear future. Linda remained constant during a period when everything else felt uncertain. In 1957, when they were both still teenagers, they married. Linda was 8 months pregnant at the time, with their son, Mark Woodward. The marriage was not glamorous, and it definitely was not easy. Tom was still working manual jobs and singing locally, trying to find a way forward. Linda took on the role of mother and anchor, holding together a young family, while Tom chased opportunities that offered no guarantees. At some point, she had to step up financially, while Tom focused fully on music. Tom admitted this in an interview, saying, "I wasn't making any money when I first went to London to work on music. So until I could send some money home, Linda went and worked in a factory. She didn't like it, but she did it because she believed in me." As Tom's career accelerated in the 1960s, the pressures on their marriage intensified. His success brought constant travel, public attention, and temptation. But despite this, Linda remained private, focusing on her son and maintaining a home away from the noise surrounding her husband. Their family life evolved over time. Tom has 2 sons. Mark Woodward, born in 1957, later became his manager, creating a professional partnership that reinforced their close personal bond. Tom also has a younger son, Jonathan Berkery, born in the late 1980s as the result of a 1989 paternity case. That chapter brought its own complications, but it did not alter Linda's insistence on privacy. She continued to live quietly, first in the UK and later in Los Angeles, removed from the public narrative that followed Tom. Despite the distance created by fame, Linda remained a stabilizing presence in Tom's life. Friends and colleagues later described her as the person who grounded him, the one connection that existed before the career and outlasted its most chaotic years. While Tom was constantly visible, Linda remained the emotional center he returned to when tours ended and applause faded. Sadly, that stability came to an abrupt end in 2016. Linda was diagnosed with cancer and died in April of that year after a short but aggressive illness. Her death was not preceded by long public updates or drawn-out speculation. True to her life, it happened quietly. Tom later described the period as disorienting and overwhelming. After nearly 6 decades together, he suddenly found himself alone for the first time since adolescence. In interviews following her death, Tom spoke openly about the depth of his grief. He admitted feeling lost and unsure of how to continue. For a man whose life had been defined by constant motion, touring, performing, and recording, the loss brought everything to a standstill. At one point, he seriously considered retiring from music altogether. The motivation that had driven him for decades no longer felt accessible. One detail from that period stands out. Before she died, Linda urged him to keep singing. It was a simple request, but it carried weight. Music had defined his public life, but it had also sustained him privately. In an interview, Tom said, "When we found out she was sick, I canceled the tour I was on and went to visit her in the hospital in Los Angeles. I told her I wasn't sure if I would be able to sing anymore, but she told me, 'You've got to. There's no way out for me. I know where I'm going. But don't die with me.'" Continuing to perform became a way of honoring her rather than escaping the pain. That decision did not return him to the pace he once kept. Instead, it changed how he worked. After Linda's death, Tom scaled back significantly. He became more selective about performances and projects, focusing on material that felt personal rather than commercially driven. The shift was visible. His recordings grew more reflective. His performances slowed in tempo, but deepened in emotional focus. He no longer chased relevance. He allowed his voice and experience to speak without urgency. Her absence also reshaped how he approached legacy. Mentoring younger artists, choosing traditional and roots-based material, and avoiding the spectacle that once defined him became conscious choices rather than compromises. The career adjustments were not framed as reinvention. They were responses to loss. Linda Trenchard had lived most of her life outside public view, but her influence on Tom Jones was profound and constant. When asked if he'd consider marrying again, he said, "I couldn't, because there's no history with anybody else." Her death marked a dividing line, not just between different phases of his career, but between who he was before and who he became afterward. And after her death, Tom finally opened up about his biggest regrets, which he had rarely spoken about. These regrets were shaped by choices made decades earlier that affected not just his marriage, but the quality of his life. Tom's biggest regret. When Tom Jones looks back on his life, there is one regret he has spoken about more openly than any other, and it's the pain his behavior caused the woman who stood beside him for nearly 60 years. Not his career choices, not missed opportunities, not records that didn't chart. His deepest regret centers on his marriage and on the emotional cost of the life he lived, while fame protected him from consequences. At the height of his success, Tom Jones had unprecedented access to attention, admiration, and temptation. He has openly admitted that during the peak of his fame in the 1960s and 70s, he was intimate with hundreds of women. This was not rumor or tabloid exaggeration. It was something he later confirmed himself, without pride and without denial. At the time, it felt normalized, mostly because touring was constant, privacy barely existed, and the industry rarely told its biggest stars no. His public image didn't make things any easier. Stories of women throwing their personal items onto the stage became part of his concerts. Repeated so often, they turned into legend. Instead of being treated as warning signs, those moments were promoted and framed as proof of his appeal. Tom Jones was marketed as the unstoppable attractive star, admired, pursued, and celebrated for excess. Very few people asked what that lifestyle looked like when the show ended. Behind the scenes, his marriage absorbed the strain quietly. Tom often described his relationship with Linda as solid, even while admitting he was unfaithful countless times. For years, he believed those two things could exist together. He continued working. She continued living privately. The imbalance became routine, not questioned until much later. He once said, "I still love my wife. I don't think you can fall in love more than once. The longer you're married, it changes. It's no longer an intimacy thing. There's got to be more than that for it to last. We both came from a working-class background, and we both came from the same place. So we're not like two foreign people having to explain to the other what their childhood was like. We grew up together. To walk away from that would be terrible." As Tom aged, the pace of his life slowed, and with that came space to reflect. In interviews later in life, his tone shifted noticeably. He no longer spoke about that period casually. He acknowledged that while he was celebrated publicly, Linda lived with the emotional weight of his choices without recognition or relief. She remained out of the spotlight by choice, but that did not shield her from the consequences of his behavior. Jones eventually admitted that he felt partly responsible for the struggles she endured while she was alive. It was not an excuse or a deflection. It was an acknowledgement that fame had allowed him to overlook the impact of his actions for far too long. The freedom he enjoyed came at a cost that someone else paid. He also acknowledged something harder to admit, that by the time he fully understood that cost, it was already too late to change it. The years had passed. The damage could not be undone. What remained was awareness, regret, and the knowledge that success had insulated him from accountability when it mattered most. In later reflections, Tom expressed a simple but painful truth. He wished he had been more faithful and more considerate of Linda's feelings while she was alive. Not more discreet, not more careful, more faithful, more present. That distinction revealed how much his perspective had shifted. The image that once benefited his career became something he no longer defended. This regret did not turn into public self-punishment or dramatic confessionals. Instead, it appeared in restraint, in how he spoke, in how he worked, in how he chose quieter projects and stepped away from the relentless pursuit of attention. The bravado faded, replaced by a tone shaped by hindsight. The realization of his mistakes stayed with him. It influenced how he approached the final chapters of his career and how he spoke about his past. Regret became less about reputation and more about relationships, about what mattered once the noise disappeared. And with that clarity came another unavoidable question. Is it time for Tom Jones to step back entirely? Retirement? The question people keep asking is straightforward. Has Tom Jones retired? After more than 60 years of non-stop work, fewer tour dates, visible health scares, and occasional cancellations, the assumption feels reasonable. But the reality is more precise. Tom Jones did not retire in the traditional sense. Instead, he slowed down intentionally, carefully, and on his own terms. By the time he reached the 20s, Jones had already lived a life. Few artists survive physically or professionally. Decades of touring had placed enormous strain on his body. Night after night of live performances, long-haul travel, and demanding schedules had been routine since the 1960s. Continuing at that pace into his later years was neither realistic nor necessary. Rather than announce a final tour or a formal goodbye, he chose a quieter shift. Fewer shows, longer breaks, and a sharper focus on sustainability. This change became more noticeable in the 20s. Jones began turning down opportunities he once would have accepted without hesitation. Touring schedules shortened. Appearances became spaced out. He stopped trying to be everywhere at once. The goal was no longer constant visibility, but preservation of his voice, his health, and his ability to continue performing at all. Health played a major role in his decision to slow down. Over the years, Jones has dealt with several age-related challenges, including hip replacement surgery, These were not career-ending events, but they forced adjustment. Recovery time mattered. Physical limits had to be respected. Unlike earlier decades when discomfort was ignored or pushed through, Jones became more cautious. Longevity took priority over momentum. This approach was visible in July 2025 when Jones canceled scheduled concerts in Bremen and Copenhagen after developing an upper respiratory infection. The cancellations were handled transparently, without drama or denial. He informed fans directly, focused on recovery, and avoided speculation. Within weeks, he returned to the stage, reinforcing that the issue was not retirement, it was pacing. That moment captured his current reality well. Jones still performs, but only when he is physically able to do so at a level he considers acceptable. He no longer forces appearances to meet expectations. If health requires rest, he takes it. That restraint is new and deliberate. Alongside physical considerations came a shift in personal priorities. After the death of his wife, Linda, Jones became far more protective of his private life. Public exposure, once unavoidable, now felt optional. He reduced media appearances and avoided tabloid-driven narratives altogether. Interviews became infrequent and purposeful, almost always focused on music rather than personal history or speculation. This withdrawal was not sudden. It was gradual and controlled. Jones has always kept his family life largely private, but after Linda's passing, that instinct intensified. He no longer felt the need to explain himself publicly or maintain a constant media presence. Silence, in many cases, became a form of control rather than absence. Today, Jones is highly selective about where and when he appears. Television roles, interviews, and public events are chosen carefully. If the project does not align with his interests or values, he simply declines. That selectivity reflects a desire to protect personal space, something he rarely had earlier in life. Geographically, Jones now lives a quieter routine. He reportedly splits his time primarily between the United Kingdom and Los Angeles. Outside of scheduled performances, he keeps a low profile. There are no attempts to stay culturally dominant or socially visible. His life away from the stage is intentionally ordinary. Physically, despite his age and past health scares, Jones remains active. What continues to surprise many observers is the durability of his voice. While age has deepened its texture, the control and power remain. He has adjusted his technique rather than fighting time, allowing experience to guide performance choices. This adaptation has allowed him to continue singing live without compromising quality. Emotionally, music still plays a central role in his life. Jones has spoken about finding stability and strength through singing, particularly after loss. Performing now serves a different purpose than it once did. It is no longer about ambition or expansion. It is about connection to audiences, to memory, and to the craft that shaped his life. With over 100 million albums sold worldwide and a career spanning more than 6 decades, Jones occupies a category few artists reach. He is not evaluated by current chart positions or trends. His reputation rests on endurance, adaptability, and consistency across eras. Importantly, Jones has never framed his slowdown as an ending. There has been no farewell tour, no announcement, and no definitive statement. That ambiguity is intentional. Retirement for him is not a line crossed. It is a series of choices made over time. So while the spotlight may not follow him as relentlessly as it once did, Tom Jones has not vanished. He has narrowed his focus to protect what remains. And that's his voice, his health, and his privacy. And after a lifetime spent performing for the world, that control may be the most meaningful success of all. Do you think Tom Jones should retire? Let us know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.